trying to figure out who's going to be like the 101 next year, who's going to be on the cover of the magazine. When you're picking at the 101, I know everybody's been picking McCaffrey and, now he's a little bit injured, but is there anyone that's not the consensus 101 that goes pretty early that you think is the clear and obvious favorite that could be the 101 next year? Breakout.
Yeah. So like McCaffrey, right? Like people are like, I'm just going to get his last good year and I'll take him first overall. And I'm a nutless monkey. I did that too. So I can't really, I mean, it's kind of cowardly, but it's like, no one thinks he's going to be the number one next year. Because they'll be like, next year, it's like, no, come on. He'll be 29. He'll have all the mileage. Even if he has a massive year, maybe he will be number one if he has a massive year. But, it's like everyone's like trying to get in the last bit of it. And that's always bad with number one, right? You want a guy like CeeDee Lamb or Amon-Ra or somebody that you're like, he'll be good for 3-4 more years. He'll be a first rounder potentially for 4 more years. And I'm just getting it in the middle of that streak. I'm not getting his last hurrah. That's really dangerous to try to get that, right? So, if you're looking at some guys who could be number one, obviously Bijan could be number one.
That was the one.
That's just so obviously like he could be like, oh yeah, Arthur Smith is gone. He has 280 carries for 1,580 yards and 16 touchdowns. And then he catches 60 passes for 550 yards and 4 more touchdowns. And he's 1.1. He's young. Everybody takes him. Okay, that's one. That's the obvious one. Breece Hall, still young enough, could catch 65, 70 passes again, but with the rushing stats and a competent offense and the touchdowns. That's another one. I think that Garrett Wilson is another one. Never had a competent quarterback. Yeah. Could be like, the CeeDee Lamb level guy, totally with Rodgers. Right. Jahmyr Gibbs just got hurt, right? But he was another one that could have been like peak Alvin Kamara. And then Montgomery's like a declining Mark Ingram, like the second year where Kamara was definitely a top 3 pick in every league after that. So those are just a few.
Garrett Wilson, what's the appeal for him to be like the next CeeDee Lamb, the guy who's the obvious wide receiver one off the board, is that with the single worst quarterback situation, in recent history, he was still, it's like a top 24-ish wide receiver. Like you took him in the first round of your fantasy draft, early second round, and even though you didn't get what you wanted, you could still start him every week with Zach Wilson last year. Can't Rodgers be the 17th best quarterback in the league, and that's good enough?
Yeah, and and one of the reasons why nobody wants Rodgers in fantasy, doesn't run anymore, but that's totally irrelevant. In fact, it's beneficial for the wide receiver. Like Kirk Cousins is the 12th best quarterback in the league, the 10th best, and nobody has any problem taking all of his receivers and so on, right? Tua is the 10th, 12th best quarterback. No one has a problem with his receivers. Yeah, if Rodgers is just sort of middle of the pack, and Garrett Wilson has no competition, right? Mike Williams, he's on my do not draft list. He
goes the 11th round, Mike Williams.
But I'm like, no, just get someone with upside. Get Rashid Shaheed, get somebody who could actually be good, because Mike Williams just doesn't stay healthy. If he had 10 games, that would be like a miracle.
How about Jonathan Taylor? He doesn't go in the first round. He might now, like you said, you mentioned the Gibbs injury, but we forget it. Only 25 years old.
He was drafted first 2 years ago. He's the same guy. He's got a running quarterback next to him. They're going to probably run a decent amount. There's no real, there's no Nyheim Hines type to take all the receptions. Yeah, he could. Anything I just said about Breece Hall or Bijan applies to Jonathan Taylor too.
Can Drake London or Marvin Harrison, do those guys strike you as someone that has, they're both getting drafted in the second round? Could those be like the consensus top 2 or 3 in the Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase tier next year?
Well, of course Harrison could be. The odds are always against a rookie, no matter what the pedigree of being that guy, right? That's like once every few years there's a guy like that. And Harrison's obviously, he and Neighbors are the most likely to be that this year. He could be the 1.1 next year. There's no real limit. And then London less so, I think, because we've seen him for a couple of years, and he was almost like Garrett Wilson. I don't know. I didn't watch that much Falcons, but it just didn't seem like he was anything but like solid. Like he was Amari Cooper, or something. He's good. He's a good player. Chris Olave, Drake London. Doesn't seem like he's going to be the dominant player in the league, but you never know. Maybe with Kirk Cousins, he would be.
2 other players that I think can qualify as breakouts, but you're making me think that rookies are like a cheap pick, because Malik Neighbors, I know he got a little dinged up here in the preseason, but what if he's the next Odell Beckham?
That dude is just every practice is like just dominating. And, I drafted Danny Dimes for $1 in the auction because I just think the whole, Wan'Dale Robinson, who's like a good slot, quick gadget guy. They've got, Jalen Hyatt, who's a deep guy. They've got like a legit, sort of uber prospect, could have been the first pick in almost any wide receiver draft, first wide receiver taken in any draft easily. In Neighbors, they really, they don't have good running backs that they're going to lean on in as much. Daniel Jones also runs. I just feel like the whole Giants team is a sleeper this year.